Ballad of a Old Man.
Well, let's see here. It's 3:51 a.m., August 6th, in the year of our Lord, 1968. I understand that anything I say might be... Oh, yes, I've been read my Miranda? Miranda, right. I've opted to speak without the presence of a lawyer. I'm of sound body and mind, and I'm aware that the things I say in this recording may be used as evidence against me in later litigations. However, I thought it important to explain what I witnessed now, while it's still fresh, and I'm not sure if I could sleep tonight if I wanted to. What's that? Oh, yes, I suppose I should start with an explanation of how I'll just get right into it. I joined the priesthood nearly 10 years ago. Prior to that, I was a student at Oxford. I was finishing my master's in theology when I experienced my first, encounter, I suppose. An encounter with what would commonly be referred to as a demon. Officer, please, I promise that this is relevant. Please. Thank you. No, I don't need any water. I'll be all right. Anyway, I suppose there's something, life-altering about observing definitive proof of otherworldliness. In '63, I was ordained after 4 years or so of practice. I wasn't exactly popular in seminary, I should add. Everyone knew who I was and why I was there. I suppose my fascination with possession and demonology combined with the abrupt shift into the priesthood from academia raised some skepticism about the extent of my faith, of my devotion. I remember once another pastor slipped what appeared to be a used condom in my wastebasket in an attempt to have me removed. Oh, pardon me. Yes, officer, I'll get to the point. I didn't become a man of the cloth because I wanted to perform exorcisms, but, my reputation pigeonholed me a bit. Pardon me for asking, but what's the least honourable job you could have as an officer of the law? Beat cop? Well, yes, consider my tenure as a priest akin to that of a beat cop. Nobody wanted to take calls or complaints about possession, so I became sort of the go-to on those issues. And then just last year, that's when I moved to the States. There are a bounty of possession claims out here, you see, and, I mentioned, I'd never been very well liked. I think they believed that sending me out here would be some sort of punishment, or at least a way to get me out of their hair. What? I suppose yes. I don't quite care for your phrasing, though. I am not claiming to have been performing an exorcism at the time of death. I'm explaining that when it happened, I was in the middle of performing an exorcism. Please, I promise there's a reason I'm telling you all of this if you'll just... Please. In my years as a priest, I've attended to hundreds of calls from people who said they were possessed or haunted, that their loved ones were... you get the point. Before tonight, I had performed dozens of exorcisms, first under the guise of a more senior priest and then on my own. What? I don't know if I believed that they were really hosting a demon in their body. You see, the spiritually inclined, those of the great, powerful faith, they tend to look for the Lord a bit more than they allow the Lord to come to them, if you catch my drift. That's why the vast majority of possessions end with me burning a bit of sage, reciting a passage from John or Matthew, and then taking my leave. When I do actually have to perform an exorcism, it involves a lot of what you might call smoke and mirrors. Most of what I do is an effort to comfort people, which is why nobody was ever hurt or anything close to it in any of my previous... What? I don't see how that matters. Whether I believe in God or not is irrelevant, and I don't think I'd like to answer that question. You act as if you've never heard of a godless priest. They're much more common than you think, officer. Right. About 2 weeks ago, I was first contacted by Mr. Dotareve claiming possession. As with any instance of demonic claim, my first reaction is a healthy dose of skepticism. We spoke on the phone and then met in person, and he was very unwell, officer. No, exactly. It was unlike any other case I've ever seen before. Well, yes, I did say I've seen paranormal creatures, but never once do I believe I encountered an actual demonic possession inside another human. But, officer, you must understand, this man, Mr. Dotareve, he was sick in a way that I could instantly recognize as supernatural. It was almost as if he had a heartbeat behind his eyes. His body was covered in scrapes and scratches. His skin was grey and leathery, which, well, in my line of work is not all that uncommon, but his eyes, they had sunk back into his skull for what felt like forever. I pleaded with Mr. Dotareve to seek medical help. I could tell something was very wrong with him, very wrong indeed. He told me that he had tried to seek medical attention, but when he visited clinics, the doctors would hiss and scream at him. He said he believed that the entity was making him see things, or perhaps that it was manipulating the behavior of the people in his life. By the time he came to me, he said it had been months since he'd even been in the same room as another person. I felt I had to help him. So What? Yes, of course, I'll explain how we got to the graveyard. Officer, please, I don't know if you're under the impression that I'm enjoying myself, but I assure you that I am not. Now, you said you wanted my unabridged testimony, and you're getting it. If you don't like what you're hearing, you can always call my lawyer. No, of course, that's not a threat. I would just like to continue, if that's all right. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, he first contacted me 2 weeks ago, and after several days of back and forth, he seemingly vanished. This happens quite a bit. People get cold feet, they cure themselves, etc., I'm sure, but something about the state of Mr. Dotareve was scratching at the back of my mind. This morning I decided to pay him a visit. After all, his apartment is not even a mile's walk from my abode. I knocked on his door, and I noticed it was ajar. I probably should not have, but I decided to push it open, just to, make sure he was all right. But no sooner did my wrist flick to lightly shove the door on its hinges that I saw him, standing right there, facing me, clear as day. He was in a trance of sorts. He told me that he'd been waiting for me. For how long? It looked like he hadn't moved for days. I did my best to comfort him. I sat him down, I got him some water, but he refused to drink. He kept insisting that he could sweat it out, that if he dehydrated himself to the point of expiration, that finally the creature would have nothing left to feed on. Naturally, I informed him I was calling an ambulance. I picked up the phone and began to dial that new 911 number, but as I held the phone in my hand, it began to sizzle and pop. No, officer, no, not the line. The phone. It was as if somebody had poured acid onto it. It was painful to the touch. I dropped it. I then turned to Mr. Dotareve to demand an explanation, but he was gone from the room. All that was left was a note. This note. Yes, no, I'm not surprised. It's Latin. I've studied enough of it to make sense of what it says. It reads, "I'm unsafe. I took them all before it could. I buried them in Morton's cemetery. I will show you. Midnight." Why didn't I what? Officer, I don't think you understand how jarring it was to see. Well, I suppose hindsight allows us to see things more clearly then, doesn't it? I think we can both agree that I'm not sitting here because I made a series of well-informed choices, can't we? Anyway, time eked by like a thick scoop of molasses as I waited for the clock to strike midnight. I arrived at the graveyard nearly an hour early. Something about being there made me feel, well, not at ease, but I guess I felt like I couldn't be snuck up on that way. Sure enough, when the clock struck midnight, there he was. He faded into my sight, almost like he had been standing there the whole time. The edges of his form twisted into the foreground, almost like a child's pop-up book, like he came from nothing and nowhere. There was silence. "Who did you bury, Mr. Dotrieve?" I asked, quite loudly, I might add. It was at this time I realised that he'd never told me his first name. Phil. I see. Well, when I asked him that, he didn't answer with words. He folded his way over to what appeared to be freshly dug and buried graves. Yes, I said folded. He didn't walk, he didn't move. It was as if his plane of existence was an illustration on the blinds of a window, as if someone was twisting the pole of the blinds, gently spinning him like some sort of wretched cartoon. A flip book, that's what they're called. Yes, I know, it sounds ridiculous. How do you think it felt seeing it? Whatever was happening to him, it was hurting him. People are not meant to move on whatever plane he was moving on. It made him bleed. His motion was perforated, like every other window blind was slicing his skin open, while the rest sewed him back up. This nearly 100 times just for him to move a stone's throw over to the graves he'd dug. I had seen enough. The time for questions had come and gone. I revealed my crucifix and bore the holy text, reciting from memory like I had so many times before, but he was unimpressed. It had no effect whatsoever. He just kept pointing at the graves. There were 3 of them, one and then the other, and then he had a wife. 2 children. I didn't know. I didn't dig anything up. Why would I? No, he didn't. I mean, he wasn't being violent. He looked suspended, as if he was being held in place by something that isn't meant to hold things. Something that knew it was breaking a cosmic rule of sorts. Finally, I asked what it wanted. Mr. Dotrieve replied. He said he was too weak to host the entity, that it needed a new vessel. He said that those graves would, so it couldn't take them. I didn't know what he meant, but you're telling me he had... Officer, now I want to be clear about something. You may find Mr. Dotrieve's fingerprints on the bodies of his family, but I assure you that whatever he did to them, he was just trying to protect them. I think it's important that his name not be sullied because of what it made him do. You what? Surely you don't think I... Officer, kindly, have some decency. Well, here I am, spilling all of my innards on the table of your confession room, and you insult me with an accusation like that. No, I will finish my story, and whatever bastardly accusations you have for me can wait until I've said my piece. Now, as I said, it looked like every time he moved it hurt him, greatly so. I told him to stay still. I addressed the creature that had control over him directly. I finally asked it to let him go. It was in that moment that things changed. Things around us darkened. Yes, it was dark, dead of night, but somehow the shadows gained shadows of their own. It got cold. Very cold. I thought for a moment it had taken me to hell. Our surroundings began to drip like warm wax, as if reality were an oil painting on a canvas that had been sitting too close to the fireplace. But it was so cold, like no cold I've ever felt. It was in my bones. It felt like there were frozen maggots crawling through my veins. My eyes adjusted to the darkness just in time to see. From Mr. Dotrieve's body is where it emerged. It didn't make sense. It wasn't right. It was just bad math. I mean, it came from him. It didn't exit out of his mouth like ectoplasm. It didn't leave the way that we imagine a soul exits a body, nor did it shed him like dead skin. What I mean is that the creature, the entity, it shifted into view as Mr. Dotareve shifted out. I don't know if you're familiar with a hologram. It's an optical illusion where if you adjust, if you shift your perspective, one image becomes another. And that's how it happened, but it was real, and again, it seemed to cause great pain. Officer, I don't think you understand what I'm explaining. I am not a physicist, but what I saw did not align with the way that we understand the world. Not through science, and certainly not through God. I was shaking. It was so cold, and I was so scared. It was humanoid, a collection of tiny moving bits that I suppose could have taken any shape, but the form that it chose was upsetting. I dropped to my knees and I prayed, really, truly prayed. I begged for salvation. I begged for it to stop. Do you know what happened then? Do you know what I received in return for my desperate request? The monster, almost as if it heard me, approached. Not like a creature would move or walk. It flipped and crinkled its image like a flurry of origami folds until it was right in front of me. It didn't move through space. It moved space around it. And then it touched me. Its bitter, blindingly hot finger touched the space between my eyebrows, and I felt a flood of pain and dread like I've never felt before, and which I don't have the time, strength, or inclination to describe. It kept me pinned down, frozen there, for 1,000 lifetimes, as it forced me to watch all the ways in which it created and destroyed life. I watched myself die. I watched my children die. I watched the world break into unspeakable war, genocide, famine. I watched you die too. Finally, he let me go, and as my hollow eyes locked onto his ever-shifting, crawling arrangement, he whispered to me at the volume of an exploding hydrogen bomb. No, God. After all that, after everything it showed me, that's all it had to say. And then it was gone. I was back in the graveyard. Mr. Dotareve was dead and mangled, as you found him. So I ran straight here. Well, I've been in your supervision ever since. No, I know it sounds crazy, but Officer? Hello? But I swear they were just... We were... No, you released me. You let me go. I can't do it again. I can't. Please don't send me back. I feel it. Inside. I see it. I see you.